Okay, hi everyone. I'm just going to follow on quite nicely from Robin, actually. So I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the financing and funding opportunities that there are around kind of water management in particular, in general, but specifically about, I suppose, green infrastructure, because that's what we're kind of talking an awful lot about here today. And some of the sessions that I saw earlier today were really exciting in terms of some of the benefits that we know can be achieved through green infrastructure, and they're increasingly being realised. So just kind of what do we mean by integrated water management? Some of the economics, Robin's touched on that already, but I just want to talk a little bit more about the costs and benefits, because actually, as it turns out, without giving too much away, usually green infrastructure is cheaper, right? So if it's cheaper, you don't necessarily need kind of terribly fancy, innovative financing mechanisms. You just need to recognise that they're cheaper and that there are more benefits and lower costs. So I just want to focus on that a little bit more with some examples. And then who pays and who benefits, because that's really crucial. Often we know that in a lot of the schemes that we're talking about, who pays for it and who benefits are often two different sets of communities, organisations, stakeholders. So we need to think about who pays and who benefits and try to match those up. Look at some of the financing options that are available, and then just a couple of conclusions. So what's integrated water management? Well, it's nothing particularly radical. I guess a lot of people here are kind of working in this space already. But there's kind of various definitions, including one from the Global Water Partnership. For me, it kind of encompasses the whole water cycle, so we're not just looking at public water supply or sewerage. We're looking at kind of groundwater, stormwater, and how all those different kinds of water can be kind of used as a resource potentially. Blue-green infrastructure, so how does the kind of green infrastructure agenda interact with some of the water-based stuff that areas that we're working in? And I'm going to talk, some of the examples are about sustainable drainage that I'll flag up. So that's obviously where you get a lot of the interactions between the blue and the green. I think it encompasses efficiency, so it's about using natural resources better and more efficiently than we do at the moment. And it's about not recognising that not just the financial impacts of what we're doing, but also the social and environmental impacts. And crucially as well, we can't do, all the schemes that I'm involved in and I've seen just walking around today and listening to, you have to have collaboration and working in partnership. It's impossible to get this stuff off the ground with just one organisation taking it forward. It has to be done in partnership. So some of the economics, I did say that kind of the blue-green stuff is often cheaper. It's not always perceived that way, so there are perceptions, particularly when you're talking to kind of people that have done things in a certain way for the whole of their careers, we know there's some inertia and resistance around kind of green infrastructure. But I think the evidence is increasing all the time, and we know now that, and I'll show a couple of examples, but that efficient and well-planned, well-designed solutions that include kind of green and blue infrastructure from the outset, from the design stage, generally tend to be cheaper. Obviously, they have greater benefits, so it's not just in terms of managing flood risk or improving water quality, but we know there's all the health and aesthetic and recreational and other benefits. I mentioned the costs and benefits tend to fall on different groups, so and I'll come back to that in a sec. And there's, tends to be more than one organisation involved, so that complicates things potentially, but it also gives you opportunities in terms of new funding streams and new financing options, but also they don't necessarily have to be financial. So we've seen lots of schemes, particularly around natural flood risk management, for example, in recent years, where partners and stakeholders are getting involved, not just through financial commitments, but also in terms of time, modelling and data and so on. So this is kind of some of the work that we've been doing recently for the Welsh Government, where we were looking at drainage solutions for new housing developments. So if you're kind of familiar with what's going on in this world, you'll know that DEFRA in England is kind of reluctant to make sustainable drainage kind of mandatory on new developments. But in other parts of the UK, I think there's more kind of appetite for moving this on. And when we looked at this kind of, at the actual economic evidence for it, we found that just looking at the capital costs, so obviously there's a lot of uncertainty and there's error bands around this, and it's hard to compare because most schemes don't actually look at a traditional solution and a green solution and kind of compare them on an equal basis. But where you can find that evidence, particularly on the larger developments, so kind of more than 100 units, there's quite strong evidence that you get significant cost savings by kind of moving surface water to the moving stormwater to the surface, basically, rather than putting it underground in tanks and pipes and so on. So it's quite, you know, and it's not just marginal. There's a huge benefit, and potentially, if you do this across a development or a local authority or a water company or a country, the savings can be pretty significant. We also looked at operational costs as well. So, because we know that there's a lot of reticence about ownership and maintenance and responsibility. But if you just look at the economics again, generally, again for larger developments, it tends to be true. But operational costs of kind of sustainable drainage compared to kind of more conventional tanks and pipes tend to be lower over time. And obviously, if you look at the benefits, then the benefits are much greater. You don't tend to get many benefits on smaller sites. That's partly because you kind of have thresholds or tipping points where you get to, you need to have a certain amount of green infrastructure to realise some of the health and recreation and biodiversity benefits. But also because, if you're only looking at relatively small schemes, most people don't even tend to bother assessing the benefits, even though they might actually be there. But again, these can be, quite significant benefits. Several hundreds of pounds per year per household we're talking about. But again, it's how you capture that, I suppose, is the key question. So let's move on to that. This is just one other scheme that we looked at for a water company where we were trying to retrofit, in this case. So it's not new development. This is retrofitting sustainable drainage. The driver was really to reduce flooding and improve water quality, so to meet kind of Water Framework Directive standards. But we looked at 4 different options. So 2 were kind of at the top, kind of storage-based, increasing storage underground, and 2 were kind of storing water on the surface. So it's either in public spaces or public and private spaces. And again, quite strong evidence here that the benefits, so that's the red bars, are quite significantly bigger for the kind of green solutions, as you'd expect. But in this case, the costs, it was a bit more of a mixed picture, so you could achieve a kind of minimum compliance standard at a lower cost, so the first blue bar, but to deliver kind of the maximum amount of storage in this case, costs of the kind of greener solutions tended to be comparable or a little bit higher maybe. So that raises a question of who should pay to realise those wider benefits. If we want to achieve those wider benefits, who's going to pay for that? But now we've got some of the tools, and Julia mentioned at the beginning, we now have many more tools available to us. So this is kind of the benefits of such tool that we've developed in the last few years, and it's free. You can download it from the Syria website, and it helps you to understand and identify and assess the various benefits from not just sustainable drainage, but water-based solutions in general, I guess, related to kind of drainage, related to drainage. So this tool doesn't just have 1 or 2 or 3 benefits. It's actually got, I think, 22 different benefits, so including air quality, health, recreation, all of the carbon, all of those things. And we can use it, so yeah, to estimate what the benefits can be. It's hard to, I think, to ensure that, well, we need to make sure that the results of this kind of stuff are robust and stand up to scrutiny, right? Because a lot of the time we're trying to get these schemes funded, whether it's in agreement with the regulator or with finance departments, and we need to make sure that the evidence behind this is quite robust. So this tool kind of tries to bring together and only includes monetary evidence where we've got enough confidence in it, based on academic literature and past experience, to be pretty sure that those benefits are actually going to be realised. So just in terms of the evidence, it's been improving a lot in recent years. When Robin and I first started doing this, probably, we were struggling. We were kind of digging around for evidence that some of the green infrastructure type solutions actually delivered these wider benefits. But I think over the last 10 or 20 years, the evidence for this has got much, much stronger and more complete. So now we understand not just about biodiversity and the impact on property values and those kind of things, but also urban heat island, health, physical and mental health, and the evidence of this is kind of improving all the time. So who pays and who benefits, quite briefly? Well, I think there's loads of different groups that benefits, and this is what we've seen in kind of schemes recently. So communities, obviously, if you're greening an area, the main beneficiaries often are the people that live and work and pass through that area. It may be kind of local authorities in terms of increased rates or increased council taxes potentially. The natural environment and environmental regulators tend to be quite keen on this kind of stuff, obviously. Water companies and utility companies more broadly. Business, schools, and we can see educational benefits. And the health sector, I'll come on to the health, but I think health's a really important one, and an area that is attracting an increasing amount of interest. So when we looked at, for example, breaking down who benefits from some of kind of green infrastructure schemes, what we tend to find, and this is from one particular scheme, but it tends to be generally the case that by improving stormwater management or improving water quality, you tend to get benefits in terms of water quality and reduced flood risk, and you also tend to get benefits in terms of the general amenity and aesthetics of an area. And then you get other benefits as well. So in this case, we had recreation and health and a few other kind of more minor ones. But actually, if you amend the solutions a little bit, what we found is that by making small tweaks to kind of green infrastructure solutions, you can massively increase the potential health benefits. And health is a particular category that I think is kind of worth mentioning because, this is just, I'm sure Kenton will talk about this in a minute, but trees and green stuff generally, I'm not an expert or an ecologist, but seem to have the most direct link to kind of physical and mental health, right? So I think, trying to capture some of that health benefit is a big challenge for us. Who should fund it? This is kind of my way I think about it generally. And I think up to kind of a statutory minimum, it's enshrined in kind of a lot of the legislation that we all work with. It's a kind of polluter pays, right? So if you're causing pollution, up to a statutory minimum, it tends to be the polluter that pays. Beyond that, it's kind of who's benefiting, and I've talked about that a bit. So it's maybe the beneficiary pays. And recently, in the last few years, we've tended to see kind of trading and offsetting schemes, which kind of comes into the realm of payments for the different ecosystem services and natural capital that we're enhancing. So just a few examples of that. You can see kind of, in the water world, discharge consents and abstraction licenses tend to be kind of down towards the bottom. But actually, if you think about the Water Framework Directive and actually water bills in general, a lot of that is funded by water bill charge payers. But a lot of the benefits are kind of broader societal and environmental benefits that we all benefit from. So there's a whole range of things in there. And then if you think about what's needed to implement those, well, there's a whole range of things that you need to actually understand and work out where we're going to extract payments or potentially extract payments from. So identifying the polluters, identifying what the property rights are, have we got the right information, who's benefiting, is there a payment mechanism? And from there you can start to see why, for example, the water companies tend to fund a lot of the general environmental and social improvements because there's an established payment mechanism, and as you know, we're used to kind of paying for some of this stuff through water bills. So it's financing options. I'm not going to talk about these in huge amount of detail because there's an awful lot going on in this space, and you know, you can go and have a look at all the stuff that's going on. The government's got a green finance task force. The Aldersgate Group next week is going to publish a report on the green finance market. CISL is the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. There's kind of EU funds in there. There's a whole range of different things going on, and so now we're understanding much more about the actual mechanisms that we can take advantage of. And some of those, one of the ones we're involved in is business in the community, and in partnership with Lloyd, so it's got a lot of the big corporates on board. And at the end of this month and next month, we'll be kind of launching a report and having some events around what the opportunities for green financing and how can we actually realise, capture some of those benefits and increase the amount of funding available. And some of the financing options, I mean, I won't go into detail about these because there's quite a lot of literature on them, and you can go out and find there's reports about all of these, right? So we're kind of used to some of the tax-based ones and charges that we kind of all recognise. There's an increasing amount, I guess, around green bonds and kind of raising green finance through the markets. And there's an increasing amount around kind of incentive-based schemes as well, and I'll just talk briefly about a couple of those. But there is quite a big menu now of potential options for financing. But I think for all of those, the key things for me that you need are something that delivers benefits, right? And I've talked about how we can try and capture those benefits and measure them. We need an asset, so we need to have something that can go onto a balance sheet potentially, and you need a future income stream. And if you've got those three things, it seems to me you can kind of try and work within any of these kind of options. Just a couple of examples from the kind of water world. Anglian Water's working with the agricultural community to kind of try and reduce metaldehyde, which is a kind of pollutant in raw water sources in the east of the country, but more widely as well across the UK. And that's working through, or partly through, cooperation payments with farmers. So if the whole set of farmers within a catchment or within a specified area manages to reduce metaldehyde concentrations to a level which means that the water company doesn't then need to apply additional treatment or to look for other water sources, then all of those farmers get a cooperation payment, right? So it's the kind of group approach to bringing in some of those, trying to realise those benefits. And South West Waters, you might be familiar with the kind of upstream and downstream thinking approaches they've developed. And one element of that, again, is kind of reverse auctions. So there's a pot of money which is basically less than the amount it would cost the water company to treat pollution from the catchment using kind of conventional approaches. And farmers can bid for that pot of money and take measures on their farms to reduce pollution and improve the environment. Sometimes, actually, I think Groundworks were here today and we're talking about some of this stuff this morning. But it's not just, you don't actually need kind of clever, innovative financing mechanisms. You just need to kind of bring people together and with common objectives and make sure that they're working kind of in partnership. And there's some really good examples out there that I'm sure you're familiar with about how you can realise and improve urban spaces for the benefit of communities. So a couple of quick conclusions. I think we need to understand the costs and benefits before we try and identify what the potential financing options are. We need to understand what the costs and what the benefits of the different schemes and options we're looking at are. And we've got tools to be able to enable us to do that now. identify who pays and who benefits. So it might be different groups, and it might involve talking to and working with new stakeholders. There's loads of different financing options available, but I think the best option tends to depend on what outcome it is we're trying to achieve, who's involved, whether there's a funding route and funds available, what financing mechanisms there are in place, and so on. So I think that's all. Thank you.